Hey guys, it's Angelo, and as patch 7.3.5 is coming closer each day, and since we've taken a look at the current state of the Shadow Priest last week, let's talk about the current rotation and possible upcoming changes, if likely. In this video, we'll go over the Shadow Priest's current most effective DPS rotation and spell priorities of course, as well as nifty little tips and tricks to help you improve. Keep in mind that nobody is born an expert, and we all do things slightly different from one another, so you will see things that may be new to you or you may haven't seen executed in this fashion before. Now, of course, without holding you up too long, let's go right ahead and have a look. Now, when thinking back at how the Shadow Priest played from the beginning of Legion up until now, not much has changed to the rotation. Getting into Void form is still your goal at all times by prioritizing Mind Blast before Mind Flay and applying your dots to your targets before you begin your rotation. Once in Void form, you'll be following a relatively simple rotation, prioritizing Void Bolt, then Mind Blast, and then of course Mind Flay. There's a few interesting points in your rotation which are important to execute properly, and one of these is the use of your Mind Flay. Ideally, you want to try and clip your Mind Flay after about every second tick, actually specifically after every second tick, which basically means that you cut it short and cast your next ability right after your second Mind Flay tick comes through. This is done because Mind Flay does less damage and generates less insanity than both Mind Blast and Void Bolt. Depending on your Void form stacks, there will also be times where you will clip Mind Flay after its third tick, and about once every 10 to 12 seconds you will let your Mind Flay run through all the way, so 4 ticks, as seen here, because Void Bolt and Mind Blast are both on cooldown. If not in your execute phase, this is pretty much your standard rotation all the way until you drop out of Void form, at one point, which will put you back in the build-up phase, and that means spamming Mind Blast and Mind Flay until you can enter Void form again. During the Shadow Word Death phase, so anywhere beneath 35% if Reaper of Souls is spec'd, and anywhere beneath 20% if it isn't, your rotation will slightly change. Apart from all the things discussed in the previous section, you will want to try and juggle around your two Shadow Word Death stacks that you have. Essentially, you want to try and save one stack at all times while using the other on a constant cooldown. Now this has two reasons. The first one is pretty simple. You don't want to waste both stacks in case you are close to dropping out of Void form, and the Insanity generation and instant cast of Shadow Word Death will definitely save you brilliantly. The second one is that Shadow Word Death actually does a very considerable amount of damage per hit, dealing a higher base damage than Void Bolt and slightly less than Mind Blast. Keep in mind though that your Void Bolt and your Mind Blast are buffed through various different effects, so they will do more damage or are more important due to their Insanity generation in one way or another. Naturally, your Void forms will last longer during the execute. Many Shadow Priests I talk with don't realize that the true source of damage of your spec, or rather our spec, isn't how hard our spells hit, but rather how long our Void form lasts. The longer you remain in Void form, the more damage you do, so in your execute phase especially, it is key to use your Shadow Word Death very effectively, and their stacks obviously very effectively as well. So again, always keep one on cooldown and save the other one if you drop low on Insanity. Now, there are certain aspects of your rotation that can be managed more easily with a few tips and tricks. You haven't heard me talk about this in a while, but mouse over macros, or focus target macros, whichever one you prefer, will come in ridiculously handy when having to maintain dots on multiple targets. As you can see here, I'm not targeting any dummies, yet can maintain my dots and Void Bolts on different targets. In order to do this, you have to use mouse over commands, which allow you to cast abilities onto enemies that aren't targeted by you specifically. Now, not only will this allow for simpler dot management obviously, it will also let you stay on your main target without the risk of dropping DPS on a secondary target, or multiple secondary targets. Personally, I believe it is very hard to play the Shadow Priest to its full potential without using these macros, and there are no add-ons required to do so. This is all within the game mechanics. The second quality of life change that I recommend is getting a cast bar add-on that displays your Mind Flay ticks. This brings us back to the point of Mind Flay clipping, because without a clear display of your ticks, you will have to kind of guess it in your head, and the only help you have is that your global cooldown will always be back up and ready after 2 ticks, meaning whenever your global cooldown is back up, 2 ticks of Mind Flay will have passed. Most castbar add-ons will also show you your server latency, or MS, which will help you make a judgment of when to cancel or recast your Mind Flay. Rule of thumb I follow here is that I want to try clipping my Mind Flay right before the cast reaches one of the white lines, or right after. Both options will result in the tick coming through, and me wasting no more than a millisecond if even on the cast time. Hitting the bar spot on will obviously be perfect as well, just make sure not to cancel your Mind Flay anywhere in between the bars, as that will actually result in a DPS loss. Void Torrent and Mindbender can vary in the way they're used from fight to fight. Generally speaking, you will ideally want to use one Void Torrent at the beginning of your Void form and one at the end of it, but the scenario is unlikely to happen every single time, especially without the help of external haste buffs. If you don't have a high amount of base haste on top of that, using 2 Void Torrents without Surrender to Madness becomes even more difficult, so my personal rule of thumb here is to either use one Void Torrent late during Void form, so at around 50 to 55 stacks, or use one at the very beginning, and then try to reach the second one, which should conclude that Void form. Your Mindbender use will vary with your haste, so generally speaking, the higher amount of stacks you can get without using your Mindbender, the better it is. I personally noticed that my Void form gets slightly less comfortable at around 30 to 35 stacks, which is where I usually use my Mindbender. In a single target encounter, I usually use it around 28 to 32 stacks, or slightly earlier depending on the fight and the movement. It's important that whenever you use your Mindbender, he can use a solid and healthy Void form, so don't use your Mindbender when you're close to dropping out of it. With Antorus releasing soon, I honestly don't expect much change to our rotation. Apart from Surrender to Madness possibly making a return, which has its own playstyle and rotation in itself, I don't think that our new tier set or the higher values of stats in general will result in changes to the flow of the spec, but however, let me know what you guys think. And be sure to share your personal tips and tricks with the rest of us if you have any that weren't mentioned in this video. Now, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if this video was helpful to you, please leave a like and subscribe to stay updated on future content. And of course, as always, have a good one my friends, and I will see you all in the next one. A lifetime in repeat.